Hello students, this is Alan Gilmore, your instructor for social welfare, introduction to social welfare, sorry. Social welfare past and present is chapter 1, and we're going to go ahead and get started with that presentation. I'll let you know that we're breaking chapter 1 up into 4 separate videos. This will be the first video, and then there'll be 3 that will follow. These will all be posted to Canvas for you. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want you to know is that there's some unique characteristics or unique components to the particular textbook that you're using. The textbook is identified as an empowerment series textbook, and I'll explain more about that on the next slide. In order to understand the concepts behind what the textbook is trying to incorporate, the first thing it's important to know is the fact that social work is a competency-oriented education, which means that we our practice is based on competencies, it's based on research, it's based on knowledge, and it's based on practice experience. And so the place where a lot of that information comes from is the Council on Social Work Education, or the CSWE. The CSWE's responsibility, and this is a national organization, is to define educational policy and accreditation standards. So for anyone who's attending a college that has a social work program, you want to make sure that this is a program that's been accredited. And if it has been accredited, it's been accredited by the Council on Social Work Education. One of the things that the CSWE has done is develop 10 core competencies and 41 related practice behaviors. These are elements that the opinion is that anyone who completes an MSW program and moves into practice should have a good working understanding of these 10 core competencies and 41 related practice behaviors. And these core competencies and practice behaviors are highlighted in the textbook so that you become more familiar with them. There's a link at the bottom of the screen to the CSWE website if you want to check it out more. So again, this helping hands icon calls attention to these related practice behaviors and competencies. So you want to be taking a look for those as you make your way through the textbook. And there are competency notes at the end of each chapter to help put what you've read and what you've understood into context in terms of practice behaviors and competencies as well. So the first question we might want to ask ourselves is, what is social welfare? Well, social welfare is this huge array of activities and efforts that happen in a given community that are really intended to prevent, alleviate, or contribute to solving a problem within the community. And when we talk about community, we could be talking about an individual, we could be talking about a family, a neighborhood, a community, a state, a country. There's even international social work. So we're talking about quite a wide array of different ways that social work manifests itself. So there's a lot of information here, so let's go ahead and break this down a little bit more. So there are 2 different models in terms of social work delivery, public and voluntary. A public agency is an agency that may be the only organization within the community is providing that particular service. Could be something like income maintenance or child protective services. So for instance, many of you may be familiar with, for instance, Fresno County Department of Social Services, Tulare County Department of Social Services, Madera County Department of Social Services. The work that those particular organizations do in their community is not replicated by anyone else doing that same kind of work in that given county. So they are the only ones who are authorized to do that kind of work, and they're the only ones who are funded to do that kind of work. Now, a voluntary agency is one that provides a service that an individual or family makes a choice to utilize, and there can often be more than one organization that may be delivering a particular voluntary service. So for instance, let's take, for example, an after-school program. After-school programs may be offered by a variety of different kinds of organizations. It might be a school district, it could be a church, it could be a Boys and Girls Club. So lots of different options are available. And again, the other thing that makes it unique is that a voluntary agency is one that an individual would choose to utilize. You don't have to use an after-school program unless it's something that you're interested in. Often, some of the services that are provided by a public agency may be court mandated for a person to be involved with, or in order to be able to receive a certain service, aid to families with dependent children, you would have to go to that particular agency and only that agency. There's a debate today, goes on all the time, as to whether social welfare services should be provided by the public, by a public organization, in other words, the government, or should it only be provided by private entities? Something we will discuss more as we make our way through the semester. Public welfare benefit programs rely on taxation, so there's another distinction. So a lot of the programs that are operated within these county Department of Social Services, Child Protective Services, are funded through taxation dollars. While a voluntary or private welfare program is often funded through contributions by individuals, charity organizations. Public agencies are administered by local or state governments. Private agencies may have a religious affiliation that's supporting them, managing those. It may be a philanthropic or charity organization. So one of the things to do is to give yourself a moment and take some time and think about, can you give me an example of a public agency? Can you give me an example of a voluntary agency? Give that some thought. We'll talk about it at the next office hours. It's important to recognize that social welfare programs focus on 3 possible actions. In terms of a social work intervention, in most instances, we're either trying to prevent something from happening, we're trying to alleviate the impact of something happening, or we're trying to contribute to reduce the incident of something happening. So let's use an example here. So dropout prevention. So a program may attempt to prevent something from happening. So social workers in a school district working with youth to prevent them from dropping out of school. So there's a prevention effort that's happening. We might alleviate something. So we might provide support services to help those who have dropped out to finish their education. So here's a situation where the person's already been impacted by the fact that they've dropped out, but now we are trying to reduce the impact that that decision has had on them and their lives. And then finally, contribute to something. We might be developing and implementing programs that are designed to identify students who are at risk. So here's again sort of a prevention approach as well. Or programs that support them back into reentry. So when you think about the Central San Joaquin Valley, what are some of the significant social problems that you think we have here? When we brought this question up in other classes, we've often heard that poverty is an issue, immigration, teen pregnancy, substance use, crime, housing, people having insufficient incomes in order to be able to support themselves and their families, access to healthcare. So a variety of different things, probably not unique only to the Central San Joaquin Valley, but some of those have some very unique aspects to them because of the populations that we work with and that reside in the Central San Joaquin Valley. So the relationship between social welfare and social work, again, social welfare is that system. It's all of those partners working together to try to provide resources to people, while social work is the profession that works within social welfare systems. What do social workers do? They facilitate change by working with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities, and also at the societal level to improve social functioning. So look at that wide variety of different kinds of populations and different kinds of groupings that we might find ourselves working with. You could be working with an individual. You could be working with a family. You could be working with a group. Maybe it's a group of students that are all struggling with the same types of issues. Maybe it's a group of employees who all work in the same organization. You could be working within organizations, or you could be working in communities. And the overarching issue or overarching effort that you're trying to achieve is to be able to improve social functioning. People use social workers because they find themselves out of sync with the environments that they are a part of. And part of our role is to not only make those environments adjust so that they're more capable of being able to support an individual, family, group, organization, or community, but we also work with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities so that they can find ways to be more effective within those environments that they are interacting with. Social workers advocate for social and economic justice within the social welfare system, making needed resources available to members of vulnerable populations, including children, elderly, people with disabilities, those living in poverty, and the list goes on. So not only are we working one-on-one with all of these different populations that we might be working with, but the other thing is that we're also trying to make changes in our own communities so that our communities are more reflective of those that we're working with. Social welfare does not just address issues related to poverty. I think there's often this idea that social work or social welfare is only related to trying to help those that are economically disadvantaged. But quite frankly, social welfare really does come into play when you're talking about building new parks or building new libraries or building hospitals. That's government assistance to a community in order to be able to create these resources. So if you have used a library, or you've used a public park, or you've used a hospital that received government funds in order to be able to establish itself, you've been a part of the social welfare system. So it's important for us to get away from the idea that social welfare is only for those who are unemployed or those who are suffering with different kinds of issues. Really, we all benefit from the social welfare system. And the thing that's unique is that there are types of social problems that get prioritized, and the reason that some get prioritized and others don't depends on the value perspective of the person who's compiling the list, the historical times in which the list is developed, and the economic resources that are available to meet the social welfare problems listed. So here's an example. 20 years ago, did we know anything about the concept of human trafficking? No, we didn't. That was just not something that was on our radar screen. So for those historical times, that was not an issue that was being funded or supported or researched. Human trafficking in different types of environments may be seen as a major issue, but in other environments, it may not be seen as a major issue. It has to do with the values that a person holds that determines whether it becomes something that needs to be prioritized or not. And then finally, we need to know whether there's economic resources that are available to be able to support programs that try to address human trafficking. That's often at the government level, either state or federal. So let's talk a little bit about values. What are values? Values are assumptions, convictions, or beliefs about what's good and desirable or the way things ought to be. We all have our own set of values, and those often come from the way that we were raised and what our parents taught us. And those values go a long way towards determining what types of social welfare or social work efforts will be put in place in a given community. But what's interesting is that we can have different degrees and variability within our own values. So here's an example. We can almost all agree that the idea of someone taking somebody else's life, someone killing somebody, is a value that we do not support. We don't think that that's right, and it's not the way that we were raised. But let's put that a little bit on its head and say, so then does that same value apply to such issues as abortion, physician-assisted suicide, or capital punishment? When you begin to put those kinds of lenses on that particular issue, for some people, your values may change given that set of circumstances. So it's important always to look deeper than on the surface in terms of particular issues and where your values stand. I want to just talk briefly about humanitarianism, which is really sort of one of the guiding values of social work, where we're promotion of human welfare and social reform. Sounds like it's a perfect fit for social work, but it's important to recognize that there's a flip side to that. And policymakers, individuals who establish what's going to be prioritized in terms of social work programs, may also operate from a place that's identified as the laissez-faire economic doctrine, which really says that you shouldn't be helping people just because they need assistance, because quite frankly, there is almost a sense of needing to punish them or try to teach them how to operate more effectively, because people are poor because they are personal failures. That work is the only honorable thing that a person should be able to do. You shouldn't be able to just simply get resources because you're having troubles. And social responsibility for vulnerable members of society should be carried out through volunteerism. So things like churches should be the place where people go to get assistance, not the government. Residual and institutional perspective. This is another perspective that contrasts with what we just were talking about, the laissez-faire. This is the idea that in the residual perspective, you're only helping those who have the greatest need. While with the institutional perspective, it holds that anyone at any point during the life cycle may have the need for some kind of social welfare or social work support, and we should be providing services to anyone at the time that they need it. So it's the difference between we only serve a small portion, those that are at the bottom of the rung, or we potentially could be serving anybody because anybody may find themselves in a difficult set of circumstances. Some hold the belief that people become poor or needy as a result of changing social institutions. So when the economy changes, do we suddenly have a new group of individuals who maybe were not considered living in poverty who are now living in poverty? What if we shift from a manufacturing economy, to a service-based economy? That may really displace a lot of individuals who previously were able to support themselves but no longer are. Great. So we're going to stop here, take a break. Please move on to the next item in the modular, and we'll pick up this discussion in a few minutes in the next video.